Chaplaincy everywhere. Recognising World Mental Health Day, we invited chaplaincy and well-being practitioners to gather together, recognising we are better together to support our chaplaincy contexts and offer crucial self-compassion care. It is now great to offer this recording of the webinar as we approach Interfaith Week. Good morning, everybody. I know you're all on mute, so you can't respond. But hello, everybody. And the banter and chatter before we went live, as it were, was just lovely that people started to do handshakes and welcomes to each other as well. So that was just superb. We're developed today because I think there's a need for us to be more vocal as chaplains and to be more recognized and less invisible. I know that may sound controversial because some of you will be very overt in your particular context, but generally in the wider community, we're not terribly overt. I met Dr. Justin Varney at the beginning of COVID on some West Midlands Combined Authority webinars where civic people brought various people together from a faith position. And sometimes the faith world is not that good at getting folks together from different contexts and different groupings. And so I invited Justin Varney to come and speak to us and encourage us and just engage with us, and perhaps for Justin to learn something of chaplaincy in many, many different contexts. So without hogging the rest of this webinar, I'm going to introduce Justin and let him speak for himself, and then at 10:21, Justin, please, if you could stop speaking, and then we'll roll into Carol Wilson and the other speakers as well for today. Justin, please.
Great, thank you, David, and hello, colleagues. It's a very impressive spread of chaplaincy across the United Kingdom, and just listening to you all introduce yourselves demonstrates how broad the reach you have and actually how diverse the settings you work are in. So I'm Justin Varney, I'm the Director of Public Health for Birmingham City Council. For those of you who've not come across Director of Public Health before, in normal times our job is to protect and improve the health and well-being of the populations we're responsible for. In general, every local authority has one of us. We used to sit in primary care trusts, and then we moved across around 2013. And in normal times, we're responsible for things like commissioning sexual health services, drug and alcohol services, and a tiny part of our jobs is responding to things like TB cases and outbreaks of measles or mumps. However, COVID fits in that responsibility of what's called health protection, and pretty much since February, COVID has consumed most of my life, my working life, much of my non-working life actually, as I've tried to navigate Birmingham and a city of 1.2 million people through this pandemic and save as many lives as we can, both in the short term and in the long term. So I'm going to touch on a couple of areas as kind of my opening comments for today's session. To help you in your reflections as you go through. COVID, I mean, this word unprecedented gets used a lot, but in my profession, we train for pandemic and we do tabletop exercises, and often this is about some form of flu, which is the most common form of pandemic. But the reality is that very few of us actually see it. And ever experience it in our lifetimes. And I don't think there's anyone alive actually who's experienced this level of societal disruption in the public health roles that we hold. All seen this level of lockdown, and we haven't seen this level of societal shift really since the World Wars. And the impact that it's had on people's interaction, and particularly on their ability to come together and connect with each other. And when we think about COVID, there are kind of tiers of layering of the impacts of COVID. There is the layer of whether you catch the infection or not, whether it puts you in hospital or not, and whether you die or not. There's the layering of that, of how it spreads in your friends and family. And then there's the layering of the impact of the restrictions that they have on how we see people and how we exchange love and friendship without being able to touch people, and actually for large periods of time not being able to physically see people. And although it's lovely to see so many of you through this Zoom call and see your faces, it's definitely not the same as being in a room with you and interacting face to face. And I think the role of chaplaincy in this space has been really undervalued and underseen. And David, as he said, we've sat on many calls together, and the chaplaincy across Birmingham have been very involved in some of the response to the Nightingale hospitals, for example, but also quietly behind the scenes, often unseen, providing support. And I think as a sector, as a group, you have two kind of faces. You have one which is inward facing to the staff of the organisations that you work with, and one which is outward facing to the clients and to the public interaction with that service. And they're really important dimensions which are relatively unique and slightly different from, for example, from a faith leader in a church or a synagogue or a temple, where the congregation comes to them. You're in the space in which you have a congregation or constituency who are around you but aren't coming together in the same way that they might do for congregational prayer or worship. And that gives you a unique opportunity in a space to interact. And I think through this that the interaction space has evolved. We've gone through periods in which we were faced with challenges of many people dying and the issues of bereavement, but also those issues of fear as we faced a virus that was brand new in the world, didn't appear actually until December last year. And it's so easy to forget that we've only been in this now for about 10 months. This is still a very new virus, very new disease, and it's still, we're still learning and developing how to respond to it. And we're moving through a phase now where I think the asks of you are moving from those initial bereavement, illness components to now how to support people who are exhausted, to people who have worked all the hours that are sent over the last 6 months to keep their organisations moving forward, to support patients, to support citizens and clients, and are suddenly waking up and going, it's not stopping. We all thought there was going to be this kind of pause period where we have 1 or 2 months to breathe and relax and regroup before the second wave. And that's not the case. The second wave is already here. So I think there are some real challenges about how you, not only for yourselves, but also for those that you work with, reflect in that space that, we've all just done a marathon over a mountain, and we've just been told, actually, no, you keep going, and there's another mountain range you've got to get through, and you've just got to keep going. There isn't really a chance to stop. And I think that's where chaplaincy has a real opportunity in a space to provide that support, to provide that reflection space to individuals, to give them a safe space which is not therapy, which often people label and won't go to. And we see very often people only step forward for help when they're absolutely on their knees. And I think the space that chaplaincy has to be that quiet shoulder, that quiet nudge that says, are you okay, is incredibly important. And David shared with me some of the stories of colleagues who have been reaching out to senior leaders and just touching base. And I have to say, in Birmingham, one of the things I've been most grateful for is some of the faith leaders and who've just reached out occasionally, just sent a text message going, are you okay today? Just thinking of you. Here if you want to have a chat. And that means so much when you're in a position like mine where, sometimes you wake up and the whole weight of the world is on your shoulders, and you look at the numbers and go, I'm running out of ideas about what else I can do, and the numbers of deaths and the numbers of cases keep rising, that actually someone reaching out in that moment is incredibly important. And I think it is, that support to leaders is a really important space, I think, for chaplaincy across the country at the moment, because it is very hard when you're in a leadership position to go, I'm struggling, and I'm having these moments of doubt, and I'm having these moments where it is overwhelming. We all have them. I don't think anyone doesn't. I think if they say that, they're lying. But it is very hard to talk about them. And it's very hard to find a safe space to be able to talk about them and share. And David knows, I talk probably more than many other leaders about the challenges of leadership during this time. But you will see it in your organizations, you will know people, and you will also be aware of some of the subtle signs, those leaders that start to get a little bit shorter in their reactions to staff. And you won't see it necessarily directly from them, but you will see it in your conversations with other staff, and being sensitive to those points, I think, is really key. The final bit I want to touch on is some reflections on crisis. You will have trained and have thought about crisis response and what is the role of chaplaincy in a crisis. And most of us, when we do this, think about a crisis, about something, it's kind of big bang. It happens today, and then we've got a recovery period over a couple of weeks or a couple of months or even a couple of years if it's a major incident. Very few of us have ever conceptualized a crisis that just goes on and on and on and on. And in thinking about it in that way, taking the thinking about how your role and your reaction, your response to crisis works in both the short, the medium and the long term, I think is important to reframe and help you structure your approach, because there will be acute crises that will continue through this. People who lose loved ones to COVID, and we will see deaths rise, unfortunately, I think, over the coming weeks and months, sadly. The medium-term crisis of people going off, the increasing workload, the sickness absence, all of those things connecting and just compounding. And then that long-term crisis, which is created by everyday continued levels of stress and the pressure that that's creating on people where there isn't an opportunity to relax. Some of you, I'm sure, will work with emergency services and armed forces who are very much better at this than many of us in the public sector, because they're good at rotating people in and out. And actually standardizing roles in a way which supports it. But you'll be very conscious in whether your organization is retail or local government. There are some people that can't be switched off, that don't get to switch out. And those are the ones that I would really say keep an eye on. So in closing, I would say, first of all, thank you. You guys are very much hidden heroes. I've seen firsthand in my own organisation how important chaplaincy has been to individuals, providing a safe space for people, and whether that's been providing support through mindfulness sessions, through discussion groups, through one-to-one support. It is essential part of keeping people going in this difficult time. And then the final point is to say, remember to look after yourselves during this. It's very easy for me to say, these are the asks of you, and that will be something we'll be discussing through the session. What are the key actions that each of you can take in your own organisations to help over the coming days, weeks and months as COVID continues? But one of those has to be also, how are you looking after yourself and looking after each other? Many of you are sole practitioners. You are the only chaplain for your organisation, and actually coming together in a group like this is so powerful and so important. But thank you for everything you're doing, and I hope those are helpful words to frame the discussion today.
Thank you so much, Justin. Justin, would you encourage chaplains to contact their local or regional director of public health. Because as you mentioned earlier, we've got people from Scotland and London and Southwest, and I think sometimes faith people are afraid of contacting civic organizations, and I want to encourage people to go more like this with civic and faith and health and well-being. And so for me, that you were so readily accepting this opportunity to speak with us is a big sign, really, that there's a bridge that is already there, and all we need to do is step on it. And perhaps in the chat, when there's a quiet space, perhaps you might put the main contact point for us to be able to disseminate further afield and start relationships, if they're not already there, to start them from this moment forward. Thank you so much. Thank you. Don't go, but we're now going to hear from our good friend Carol Wilson. Carol, please.
Good morning, David. Good morning, Justin. Good
Morning, Carol.
Good morning, everybody. I want to pick up. So my name is Carol Wilson. I am the head of spiritual care for the Mental Health Trust here in Birmingham and Solihull, so BSMHFT. And I want to pick up on one or two of the things that Justin was talking about, and these are things that we have seen coming up frequently. I think that's a fair thing to say. Some of it's based around this notion of societal shift. So much of what we would ordinarily use as a way of processing together with our loved ones, with our family, our friends, our communities, so much of what we would use that for in terms of processing challenging experiences is not open to us at the moment, which means that people often feel very lost in terms of where do I go with my distress about this. The routes that I would ordinarily use aren't available to me. Justin mentioned things around resilience. Like Justin, I seem to have missed the seminar on dealing with the pandemic when I trained. I'm not very remiss of me, but there we go. But that means we're in the unusual position where actually experts are few and far between. We are working through this together. And that means we have to pay particular attention to that sense of our own personal resilience. I cannot overemphasize Justin's last point there about looking after yourself. This is not an optional extra. It's not a fluffy bit that's part of because we're good reflective practitioners, so we'll make sure we do a bit of fluffy reflection. This is nitty gritty, bottom of the pile, processing how we ourselves are containing and moving through this situation. Because there's a very strong sense in which people who are on that front line, in whatever context that you're working in, that they are experiencing a level of what we term moral injury, moral distress, that no one has ever faced before. No one. So this happens. Moral injuries is defined when one is required to do something that contradicts one's values in order to fulfill a duty, or when one is prevented from doing something by a rule that says you can't do that at the moment. And that's as simple as a nurse who has to say to somebody, I'm sorry, but you cannot come to see your loved one. That goes against every single value she has. So those are things that we need to really pay attention to. Can I draw your attention, please?
Just briefly, Carol.
Here in Birmingham called Chaplaincy Plus. I know that Steve Babington, who's part of the great team that run that, is here, and we are running regular well-being sessions for people who are supporting others, and that's for people of faith, of no specific faith, people who recognise the value of spiritual care, but who are looking for a space for themselves. Steve,
Thank
if
you,
you'd
Carol.
be so kind
Carol.
to post that link, that'd be great. Thanks, David.
Lovely. Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much. And the way you said from the heart that we're in uncharted times, and putting your hand up to demonstrate the nurse having to say no is like powerfully touching. So thank you so much for sharing. And we look forward to hearing more from you. Matthew, if you would introduce yourself, please, and just share with us for a few moments.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Matthew Gordon. 2015, I worked whilst I was training as a volunteer chaplain under David at the NEC. But during that time, I had this idea and ambition that I wanted to broaden my activity. And I set up a company called Spectra, and we are the delivery partner for the Care Leaver Covenant, which is similar to the Armed Forces Covenant, but for children who are aging out of care. And it's a national program and the first of its kind. And it has been an absolute joy to bring the spirit of chaplaincy into my daily activity. I want to talk about empathy, because empathy is central to what we do, how we respond to young people who don't have parents, who are exhausted, who have faced disruption all of their lives. And what the covenant seeks to do, especially in this time, is to build this coalition of support to bring families and communities together to support those who are most vulnerable in our society. So it's been an absolute pleasure to work strategically behind the scenes, working across government, across parties, working at a national and subnational level to do the very best. I feel quite privileged because this is not something that I had anticipated. It's very much that the work of the covenant chose me rather than I chose this. And I think this work as a volunteer chaplain is central to what we do. We know that we have been called to serve in a very unique and deliberate way. But echoing what Justin and Carol have said so far, we do need to look after ourselves. We do need to practice self-care. At the start of COVID, I lost my father, who was treated for COVID-19. He passed away on the 21st of March. That was a massive blow. But for the first time, I think I really was able to empathize with so many young people. There's at least 10,000 children who age out of care every year, and there are 75,000 children in care. What it feels like to have limited support. And so now it's essential that we ramp up our energies and our focus to support those who are in need and have complex vulnerabilities.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you very much.
I just want to make a bridge that the wonderful stuff that the Care Leavers Covenant does has links with many, many universities. And I would encourage our university chaplains to make contact with you. I know particularly Coventry has a signpost for the Covenant on their website, which all students can access. And it's another avenue of well-being that perhaps chaplains are not aware of. So thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Keith Simmons, please, if you would introduce yourself, Keith, and share with us for a few moments.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Keith Simons. I work for the United Synagogue Chesed Committee, which is responsible via the Home Office for chaplaincy for Jewish prisons and hospital chaplaincy as well. I've been involved in the hospital chaplaincy and bereavement counselling for some 30+ years. And I've found some common threads in helping people to lose any negativity they may have due to life pressures or bereavement of a loved one. I do, however, talk mainly from my experiences as a prison chaplain, serving from high security to open prison, so perhaps a little different angle from those previously talking. I have obviously a captive audience, as you'll appreciate. And there are some 87,000 people in establishments throughout the UK, of which about 460 are Jewish. Essentially, in terms of chaplaincy, I look for ways to bolster their self-confidence so they can regain a level of dignity and self-worth, which I attempt, not always successfully, I have to admit, to do by looking for a motivational button that will help them achieve the above. I think it's fair to say that everyone does have this button, we just have to find it. I look and talk to them of their previous work or hobbies, find something they enthuse about it, and capitalise on it. Obviously with COVID, things are a bit different. In the past, we've done many things. I use our festivals and periodic exhibitions to include inmates in the organising of various services and exhibitions. And it is amazing how even those who would profess to have no interest in following their religion, they're very much on the periphery, if you like, of our religion, they're still proud to help and assist with exhibitions and services. Perhaps it's because it's something to do away from the humdrum boredom that is prison life. Certainly what is in the inside world we call lockdown, sorry, the outside world we call lockdown, but in the inside world we call lock up. But then the need for peer acceptance kicks in and they start involving themselves because they want to. And that is when we look for the hot button and reawaken the interest in achieving dignity and self-respect. I think a prime example last year, not just of chaplaincy, but of interfaith helping each other, was when one prison hosted the Anne Frank exhibition over a 7-day period. Jewish and non-Jewish inmates were pleased to be trained as guides for the week. This was not only a valuable educational lesson for them, raising their status in their own eyes, but it showed them that their perseverance in participating in the project brought rewards to them in terms of morale and respect. The same could be said each year when we run Holocaust Memorial Day services. 2 years ago, 90 inmates came to the service, superbly organised by one non-Jewish inmate and assisted by some 12 others. An excellent example not only of rebuilding your self-worth, but a wonderful working model of multi-faith chaplaincy. Giving a level of responsibility to people makes them feel good, and they do their best to justify the faith you have shown them, even in this day and age and under current circumstances. Using our festivals generally has certainly brought some of my Jewish inmates back to their religion and has helped them in general terms. In conclusion, Jews and non-Jews attend in force, motivated by the need to belong to a socially acceptable gathering. They want to belong. They want respect. That is their motivation and is how I believe chaplaincy, whether religious or secular, can succeed in helping those where many other concepts and ideals fail. But I look forward
to David.
etc. to help me in my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. That's so enriching, and thank you for sharing. If we could swiftly move to David Ryan, that would be wonderful, David, please.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, David.
My name is David Ryan. I'm chaplain at the Alexandra Hospital in Redditch, which is a medium-sized acute hospital. We're part of the Worcestershire Acute Hospitals Trust. We might be called Middle England. We're in the heart of England, and in a way we've been in the middle through COVID. We've, I guess, had a middle impact as well in terms of infection rates and death rates as well. The impact on the hospital and the staff that we've seen has been huge, and the middle of March, the hospital was essentially emptied in readiness for what was to come. Reflecting on all of that and the weeks and months since, and picking up on one or two things that Carol said as well, moral injury has certainly been part of the life of healthcare staff, and also families as well. When families can't visit a loved one at the end of their life, that has that sense of moral injury, that there's something wrong just in that moment and in that time and place. And another phrase, and this is part of our role as chaplains in interpreting and understanding what's happening in organisations and institutions, and what's spiritually and emotionally happening. And a phrase that I've come across is called emotional labour. And the sense of emotional labour is that, and to put it simply, we wake up feeling lousy in the morning, but in healthcare especially, when you get to the ward, you put your bright face on, you're positive, and you're professional, obviously, for the patients. Now that's okay and sustainable for a day or two or three, but when you're doing it day in and day out, because that's what you do, that's your professional dedication, but without the relief, then that bears heavily on emotional and indeed mental health as well. A third area that we've come across, and death and bereavement are very much part of the landscape for hospital chaplains, is around rituals, and especially funerals. We know how different they've become, but something we've seen in the hospital is that funeral corteges will process and actually come to the hospital, and staff can pay their respects actually on the hospital site. It feels different, but it's been really deep and important, and has given people, I think, an unusual but in a way creative way of paying tributes and respect.
Thank you, David.
Just
please.
Thanks, David. Thank you. Yeah.
No, please close if that was something that you really do need to share.
And just one final reflection is that what struck me about the crisis is that it's about the whole of life. It's not just about our workplaces, and that's certainly something Justin very much picked up on. It's about home life. The way that we would usually relax and refresh ourselves is just very different at the moment.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And our friend from Durham University, Chaplaincy, please, Mashad.
Yes, I'm Mashid Turner, Muslim chaplain from Durham University. One of the reasons that people come to chaplains, from my own experience, is that they feel that, they don't outrightly say it, but they feel a kind of trust. And this is basically down to the fact that although chaplains have to follow the university guidelines, they are ultimately answerable to a higher being. And the people who come to me are aware of that. So they feel that, that there is not total, it's not boxed into a particular remit. So it moves higher than that. And they feel that, they sense that. And that has an impact on their well-being. But sometimes it's difficult for chaplains themselves, because they find themselves in this dual position of what is the right thing to do, and what is my position for the university and how I'm supposed to do that. So that this kind of difficulty is something that chaplains are constantly having to examine and try and keep a balance between adhering to university rules and regulation, and at the same time doing the right thing by the person that has come to them. So the difficulties that a lot of Muslim students and staff have at the university are mainly really to do with media being depicted as the other. A lot of people even go as far as hiding their religion. Some people go as far as hiding their nationality because of being labelled, stereotyped, making assumptions about these people. Chaplains themselves are often judged and stereotyped without having knowledge about them and having talked to them, getting to know them. So this kind of stereotyping, judging, labeling is one of the main things that students have a problem, and it does have an impact. It has a huge impact. We just cannot measure just one word, one text message that's not very nice, what an impact it has, especially during these COVID times when we can't personally go and support people. So, I mean, for me, this has been a big problem, a big issue for many years, and my own particular support has been through interfaith activities, a mixing of students and community and staff in order to be able to build up relationships, to raise awareness about each other and get to know each other's faiths in things like scriptural reasoning and other interfaith activities.
Lovely.
So these are the things that are important, but it's a shame we can't have that face to face, but at least we're keeping the link going. Thank you.
We are. Thank you so much. Thank you. That leads beautifully linking into Chris Swift, please. Chris, thank you.
Hi, I'm
Chris.
Director of Chaplaincy and Spirituality for Methodist Homes, MHA, which some of you may be aware of, others perhaps not, but we operate 90 care homes and about 70 retirement living schemes, flats for older people, and employ about 130 chaplains across the UK. It has been, as you might imagine, a pretty devastating time. Just to give you one example, it's perhaps not how the data is always presented, but I think it gives you pause for thought. It's often said that about half the deaths that have taken place through COVID have been in care homes. That means if you take the government's figures at the moment, about 21,000 deaths have happened in a population of 500,000, and 21,000 deaths have happened in a population of 67.4 million. So the impact on care homes has been colossal, certainly per capita the most devastating. And I visited a care home during the lockdown period that had been very badly affected. And I said to the staff, how many of the residents do you think might have died during this period? And there have been many, many fatalities. And I was quite surprised that they said, oh, we've talked about that. And the answer was 1. And I'd have thought psychologically you'd want to say, oh, probably, you know, more than that, but their honest opinion, because we look after people in care homes usually for 2 or more years. So the losses have been quite devastating for individual members of staff. Justin talked about kind of operating in an emergency context, and I was in the NHS for 20 years, and only once was I involved in a major incident, a Majax, which, to be honest, from its starting to being very well under control, was about 4 hours. It was a serious RTA on the M62. We operated Gold Command at MHA for 101 days before stepping down to a less intense process of management. So I think the living with dynamic uncertainty, or what some colleagues in the NHS are also calling a chronic emergency, has been very, very costly. And I think within that, chaplains have been valuable narrative partners to staff and to residents and to relatives as they seek to kind of comprehend the experiences that have happened to them. And that role, again, that's already been touched on, of peripatetic pastoral care matters so much. I think, just to finish, I would also echo the comments of colleagues about moral injury, and I think that's really significant. And from my point of view as a director in the organisation, as well as being in charge of chaplaincy, so part of the senior decision-making team back in February and March particularly, I look now, I'm very glad to say we haven't recorded a death attributable to COVID for about 9 weeks. But it also makes me think, how many of those deaths were avoidable? Now, maybe we can say we could have known more, we could have acted differently with better information, but that's the kind of reflection I think people are having done the best that they could with the information they had, but now feeling actually we're in a different place, and maybe those decisions could have been different.
Thank you so much, Chris. That's very heavy for us. The richness and sincerity from all the speakers so far has been just wonderful. And in the chat comments, you will have seen people being so thankful for people sharing so openly and sincerely. We're now going to move 120 people into breakout rooms with our keynote speakers and other leaders. This is the first breakout room of 2. Please bear with us for a moment. Thank you. If Carol might like to make a quick comment. Carol?
Hi, yes, thanks, David. So we had quite a wide-ranging conversation. I'm sure others did too. But I think for us, there were some highlights around we acknowledge as chaplains that we are chaplains because it feeds us as well as those who we serve. And so we too are struggling because we are not being fed in the way that we would be ordinarily if we were fulfilling our vocation, whatever language you want to put around that. So that was one thing. And another thing was around physical touch and how for some people being unable to have that, or perhaps they live alone and therefore having no access to it, is a nightmare. And for others, actually it's a huge relief because they don't like it and they're not forced into it at the moment. And so how we can very easily impose what we might term a negative emotion, guilt, shame, such like, on a situation that actually is just how it is, because we're all different. Heard some very touching stories as well.
Thank you. Matthew, if you would like to share, please.
Yes. There is an amazing quote by James Baldwin which says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And in this group, it was wonderful to hear about stories around proximity and the amazing work that has taken place with our NHS staff teams, how we are saddened and have also appreciated the applause that the NHS received over the 10 weeks, and that there is a case for it to continue because there is work to be done still. But even if we can't applaud our NHS teams and carers in public, we can pray continuously behind the scene. And the sadness that not being able to support personally had been a challenge. But just some of the heroic work that was taking place, and real keen examples of NHS staff and carers going above and beyond in their service, and just being a part of that was something quite special.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Perhaps if we skip to David Ryan, then whilst Keith organises his audio video. David Ryan, please.
Okay, thanks, David. Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah. We had some really good reflection on the power of technology and how WhatsApp enabled an end-of-life conversation to take place across continents. So, with that as well, something of course, the limitation of technology and that sense of actually being present with one another, and actually so much of what we do as chaplains usually, and for instance in Birmingham city centre, of actually being present, it has been more difficult. Obviously things like furlough as well. And a final, actually, that permission to be vulnerable from Christina, which some organisations are still trying to be sort of strong and resilient and all of that, but actually an honesty which chaplaincy can bring, that people are exhausted, and that vulnerability is the first point of strength.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, David. Thank you. Is Keith with us now?
Yep. On the first part, there was an element of concern that some of the organisations we deal with may well use, how can I put it, the lockdown methods that are currently being used that are quite severe, that they may well not come back to anything normal, because it's more to their advantage, certainly in terms of prisons, to keep people under lock and key, and they might be using COVID to help them in this aspect.
Gotcha.
But I think on a happier note, we all decided that, yes, what COVID has done has given us time, in many cases, to reassess our lifestyle, and time to appreciate the time that we've got to go out and about, and sometimes quite, if you like, incidentally, do our job by the people we meet,
Yes,
things like that. And that has definitely been beneficial.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you. Thank you. Mashed from Durham University, please, Mashed.
Yes, I think, you know, it was, we discussed the difficulties of, firstly, in the context of shops and supermarkets, the importance of chaplaincy there, and then not being able to, the restrictions, how the impacts. And then we discussed about the two aspects of difficulties with COVID. One is to see constantly see how caring, compassionate, thoughtful people are. On the other hand, it can be used as a kind of bullying tactics, in where when you're walking, for example, some people purposefully come and walk right next to you to annoy you, or come and sit in the same place as you. In this case, an example of a train journey, you know, when they come and sit next to you and so on. And it was, for me personally, I was saying I may be wrong to think in that way, but because of the pressures of race and things, you may, someone who is not white may take it as a personal thing, and double guilt of double, you know, a damage of thinking, well, is it because they're bullying me because of my color? Yeah. So there's a kind of, and then you see really kind people, and I think it was already mentioned before as well about being from a culture of hugging and, you know, being closeness, and having to keep that separateness all the time at all levels. And for students as well, coming to Durham University, coming all the way from another country and then being locked up in their room. So there's all kind of difficulties, and you can empathize.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that. Chris, please, very briefly, before we go into our second breakout space.
Yeah, very briefly then. I think one thing that was said early in our discussion, I thought was really helpful about chaplaincy and its need, preparing people for an uncertain future. And it's interesting who our teachers might be in order to do that, because it's sometimes the people who see most control in their life and their finances and so on who have been most disturbed and disrupted by this. And other people come from contexts or experiences where uncertainty is more of a given. And perhaps there are things to learn, and transcultural learning there, for example. We talked quite a bit about moral injury, technology and access to people we are caring for, and also young people and their needs and how to meet those at this time.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's nice that you focus on young people, particularly with your experience and being a practitioner in Methodist homes for the elderly and aged. So that's a nice intersectional. I noticed in some of the breakout comments from my colleague Kaz that perhaps we need to do more to step out of our comfort zones and make contact time for students and others, like we've heard in Durham, away from their families in thousands of miles away, let alone Sheffield to Birmingham. As people come back into the main space, as it were, you might not be able to see, but on my lapel, I'm wearing a green ribbon, reminding myself of the forthcoming World Mental Health Weekend. And symbols and signs are so helpful in chaplaincy. It shows our our inclusivity and that we celebrate diversity. As we arrive at the closing moments of this webinar, I just invite Dr. Justin Varney again to perhaps make a summing up from his perspective of what he's heard and experienced this morning. Justin, please.
Thank you, David. And first of all, thank you for colleagues for being so honest and open in your sharing with each other. I think everything that I've heard reinforces the importance of chaplaincy, reinforces the importance of talking to each other during this period so that no one becomes an island or isolated. And the importance of sharing those really simple tips, and whether that's simple tips about how to get a second chip in your phone so it's not your personal number, that's also your work number, or how to manage getting physical activity into your day. You know, there are lots of things in which we can all help each other just stay strong and be honest about the reality of the situation we're working in. And I think that's my kind of final recollection or key point for today, is during times like this, what is most powerful is authentic honesty.
Yes.
Being honest about how difficult it is, not trying to paper over the cracks, but being real and authentic that there are cracks and we're all doing the best we can. And alongside that comes the compassion, which is so important to mental health and well-being, and to your role as chaplains in the many organisations that you work with. And I'm very grateful for the support and the honesty you've shared today. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you. We've only got a few seconds before we close, but Justin, I would like to respond by saying to you personally, on behalf of many, that your authenticity in the webinars with the West Midlands Combined Authority it's been palpable. You've made your heavy role approachable, that we can feel as though we're helping, rather than you're over there and we're over here, that we're in this together. And I think that joining hands through spirituality or spiritualities is crucially important. And I regard the speakers that we've had before, that we represent many different faith positions, which is the richness of Britain. And long may we be positive ambassadors for wide inclusive chaplaincy, and particularly at this time. And let us hold on to the hope that we have and encourage somebody else today. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you for the people behind the scenes that have made today possible. And thank you for the people that sent their best wishes and prayers before the event took place. If we can help in any way, please make contact, and we'll try to follow up with all of the points in the chat sections and make sure that we offer feedback and follow up over the next few days. Thank you so much to everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.